I was married to Elliot Austin for 4 years, and I cheated for 2 of them. The person I met on stage, who was supposed to lift me up, was actually determined to break my wings. Question: what should I do if my husband doesn't support the work I love and actively obstructs it? Answer: just find someone else. When I quickly packed my things and was about to leave, he actually said he was seeing someone else just to test if I still loved him. I was so angry it almost made me laugh. Elliot Austin, don't you have a mouth? If you have one, why not just ask directly? Donate your concerns to someone who needs them. At the final competition of the dance drama Survival, I won first place. The promotion had stated that there would be contracts signed on site after the selection, but I waited in my seat for a long time, and when everyone finally dispersed, I haven't received any notice about signing a contract. It was the same old story. Clenching my fists, I went straight backstage. Polly Brooke and the director were chatting and laughing. Standing next to her was my husband, Elliot Austin. When he saw me, he frowned in displeasure. I asked, "Director, didn't you say I was the best choice for the lead role?" The director glanced at me and said, "After watching Polly Brooke's performance, I think she's more suitable for the lead." Polly Brooke's performance wasn't good. She even got basic moves wrong. I tugged at the corners of my mouth and said calmly, "Oh really? A lead who can't even get the basic moves right?" Polly Brooke replied in a sweet voice, "Jessica, being the lead isn't just about perfect moves. It's about having the right emotions. The director thinks my emotions are better." I scoffed, "You're casting a dancer, not an actress. What good are emotions if you can't even perform basic dance moves?" I turned to the director and asked, "Didn't you just say you wouldn't vote a capital?" It was their publicized open selection that gave me the courage to try again. But in the end, it still couldn't compete with the behind-the-scenes manipulation. Jessica Nelly, enough. Elliot Austin, who had been silently watching, suddenly spoke up. "Enough. Why is it enough? Do you know how long I prepared for this competition? Do you know how I dreamed of being on that stage?" I almost yelled at him, my emotions out of control. Elliot Austin looked at me coldly. "Polly really likes this role, so I'm letting her have it." He kept saying Polly's name like she was the only one that mattered. Probably, she soon would be. I took a step back and smiled as I shook my head. All right, you and your little mistress. May you last forever." Elliot Austin, remember to sign the divorce papers when you get home. You'll be free to marry your sweetie soon. Slap. A hard slap landed on my face. My cheek burned with pain. I fought back tears and lifted my hand to slap him back, probably not expecting me to retaliate. Elliot Austin actually tipped my slap solidly. I must have hit him harder than he hit me. Seeing his face redden visibly made me feel a bit better inside. Polly Brooke hardly held his face and scolded me. "Jessica, how could you hit someone? You hit him so hard. You're so vicious." I shook my wrist, angry to the point of laughing. "What? Are you blind? Can't you see who started it?" Elliot Austin touched his red face, and his gaze towards me changed. I smirked and said, "Want me to give your little lover a slap too?" "You." Elliot Austin didn't say anything, but Polly Brooke was eager to speak up. "With your attitude, no wonder Elliot doesn't like you." I raised my hand. "Oh, he likes you, who enjoys being hit. Here, let me help you out with a slap." Before I could move, someone grabbed my hand. Elliot Austin held my wrist tightly and said coldly, "Don't be ungrateful. You can divorce me, but only after the Nelly family pays back all the money they owe the Austin family. Though from the way your dad is begging, he probably won't be able to pay it all back in this lifetime. The Nelly family does owe Elliot Austin a lot of money, but that's because he's been deliberately keeping us in debt. If he hadn't kept giving my dad just enough hope, even if we went bankrupt, the Nelly family wouldn't be in such a dire situation, relying entirely on his support." I smiled bitterly. "If you hate me so much and want to trap me with the Nelly family's debts, is it really going to give your little lover a title? Is it that interesting to you?" He chuckled. "Yes, it's quite interesting." I tried to pull away, but his grip was loose. I stumbled to the right and fell to the ground. I raised my head slightly. Elliot Austin looked down at me with cold eyes. Polly Brooke feigned surprise and smirked, and the director and other staff gathered around, whispering amongst themselves. It was humiliating. Just moments ago, I was that assumed lead on stage, gracefully dancing. Now, I was nothing but a joke. I lowered my head, took a deep breath, and pushed myself up from the floor. Tears were uncontrollable. I wiped away the falling tears, holding on to the last bit of dignity as I walked out of the room. Elliot Austin wouldn't follow. He was probably enjoying himself with Polly Brooke, laughing and celebrating. The sky was dark, just like my life. I sighed, took off my dance shoes, and walked barefoot down the street. My feet were really ugly, deformed from years of training and injuries, but because of my passion, I endured it all. When I was 5, watching the elegant figures on screen, The dream of becoming a dancer was etched into my heart. But because I married Elliot Austin, everything was ruined. He didn't want me performing on stage, nor did he want me pursuing this career. He only wanted me to stay home and be a good wife. I had confirmed countless times that this casting call was open, which gave me the courage to try again. But in the end, I still failed. I was exhausted. I went back to the Austin home, didn't eat anything, and went straight to bed. I was jolted awake when Elliot Austin grabbed me by the collar. His eyes were icy as he placed a bowl of porridge on the bedside table. Trying to get yourself killed. Don't you know to eat something with your stomach being this bad? I looked at him and forced a smile. Not spending time with Polly Brooke. Elliot Austin tucked my stray hair behind my ear and said, Don Dao, it was my fault for hitting you today, but I don't want to hear divorce talk again. I smiled. You're not wrong. You're always right, aren't you? Elliot Austin looked at me. You know I don't like you dancing on stage. If you dare to participate in such competitions behind my back, I guarantee it won't be the last time. That's Elliot Austin, arrogant, overbearing, unreasonable. I smiled. So, why does Polly Brooke get a free pass? He paused and replied, Don Dao, she's different. Different. It's just that she's his beloved. So whatever she wants, he'll hand it to her personally. I smirked. If you like her so much, why not even give her a title? Or are you worried about me dividing the divorce property? Fine, I'll leave with nothing. Jessica Nelly. Elliot Austin growled, grabbing my chin. I just told you not to overstep. Seeing his furious expression suddenly made me laugh. The best way to deal with someone you hate is to get them as far away as possible. Elliot Austin, are you a masochist? My jaw ached. His grip was heavy. I just kept looking at him, smiling. After a while, he finally withdrew his hand, picked up the porridge, took a spoonful, and blew on it. Eat. I turned my head away. Elliot Austin turned my face back to him and forced the porridge into my mouth. I choked and had to bend over the bed, coughing until my face turned red. Once I finally managed to recover, he placed the bowl in my hand and said, Don Dao, your dad called again today asking for money. He smiled. The Nelly Group is now just an empty shell. Who else can your family rely on except me? I looked down. It should have gone bankrupt a long time ago. If it weren't for you keeping it afloat, my dad wouldn't still be clinging to the hope that the company could be revived, sell the shares, and use the money for a small business. You wouldn't have to go through all this trouble. Elliot Austin propped his chin on his hand, looking at me thoughtfully. But your dad just can't let go. So don't even think about divorce. Otherwise, if I cut off the support to the Nelly Group, who knows what your stubborn dad might do? He was threatening me. I've never understood why Elliot Austin married me before the Nelly Group collapsed. Our marriage was a strategic alliance, but now that the Nelly Group has fallen, he hasn't kicked me out for Polly Brooke like I expected. Instead, he's blocking me from getting a divorce. I drank the porridge in large gulps. Tears fell into the bowl, making it a bit salty. I sniffed, turned the empty bowl over to show him. Finished. I'm going to bed. Elliot Austin didn't say anything. After a long time, I heard the door close. My body trembled uncontrollably. I actually liked Elliot Austin once. In my junior year, when the school invited alumni to speak, Elliot Austin was one of them. I performed an opening dance, but twisted my ankle when I accidentally made eye contact with him. I had always been the top student in the dance program, and the teacher had let me perform, but it turned into a big mess. I clenched my fists, my mind in a chaotic mess, trying to figure out how to explain to the teacher. A hand suddenly appeared in front of me. He smiled and asked, Can you get up? I blushed instantly. Yes, half reluctantly. I took his hand, and he helped me off the stage. Later, I finally married him as I wished, but the person I met on stage ended up breaking my wings. As Elliot Austin wished, I stayed at the Austin home as a dutiful wife. When bored, I'd run to the big mirror in the walk-in closet to practice dance, imagining myself on a brilliantly lit stage. My dad called and asked me to return home with Elliot Austin for dinner tonight. When we were newlyweds, we would go back once a week. But later, as Nelly's family fortunes declined, Elliot Austin couldn't even be bothered to come back with me once a year. At dinner that evening, I brought it up with him. I said thoughtfully, I know you're busy. I'll go by myself. I'm just asking out of courtesy for my dad. Elliot Austin glanced at me and said, Actually, I had some free time today. Let's go back together. Although I was surprised he agreed to come back with me, I didn't press the issue further. At the dinner table, my dad repeatedly hinted whether Elliot Austin could provide some more funding for the Nelly Group. I had only had a couple of bites when my mom dragged me into another room with various excuses. Jessica Nelly, why isn't your belly showing any sign of movement yet? Did you take the medicine I gave you last time? As soon as we were inside, my mom raised her voice at me. Of course, I couldn't tell her that Elliot Austin and I had been sleeping in separate rooms for a long time. So having a baby would be quite a stretch. Your dad's business is in bad shape right now, and he's relying on Elliot Austin for support. He's in his prime. And if you don't get pregnant and tie him down, who knows who might get pregnant by him instead? My mom looked genuinely anxious. Should I tell her that he's been seeing someone else, and that it's my college classmate, one I dislike the most? I bit my lip and said, "What's the use of hanging on like this? That's your dad's lifetime of hard work. How can we just let it go?" After enduring a lengthy lecture, I was finally allowed to go back to the table for dinner. It seemed everyone had forgotten that it was my birthday. I thought maybe they came back to celebrate my birthday, but no. I forced a self-deprecating smile, took 2 more bites, and decided to leave. As I was leaving, my mom kept signaling me desperately. I turned away from her and slumped back in my seat. Someone called Elliot Austin, and, whether it was intentional or not, he put the call on speaker. A delicate voice came through. "Elliot Austin, you said you come celebrate my birthday with me." Oh, I almost forgot Polly Brooke and I share the same birthday. Elliot Austin remembered her birthday, but not mine. I closed my eyes and stayed silent. Elliot Austin cooed, "Yes, I remember. I'll come over as soon as I'm done here." Polly Brooke asked, "Did you buy the birthday cake?" He chuckled lightly. "Of course, I bought it. How could I forget your birthday?" She sounded thrilled. I knew Elliot Austin was the best. The two of them continued their flirtatious exchange for a while before Elliot Austin ended the call. I opened my eyes and stretched lazily. "Just leave me here. Go see your little mistress." Elliot Austin looked at me with a darkened expression. "Don't you want to say something?" I casually replied, "Well, have fun." His face hardened, and he abruptly stopped the car. "Get out." I smiled. "No need for you to ask. I'll get out myself. Have fun." With a bright smile, I unfastened my seatbelt and hopped out of the car. Elliot Austin showed no sign of hesitation and drove off without a second glance. Phew. I sighed with relief and pulled out my phone to use its flashlight. Life has been much better since I stopped liking Elliot Austin. I used to not know how to cook, and I cut my fingers countless times just trying to make dinner for him. I wait every night for him to come home for dinner. While he was out having a good time with Polly Brooke, there was even one time I called him, and all I heard was Polly Brooke's sweet voice saying, "Jessica Nelly, Elliot Austin is taking a shower. He'll probably be home later." So, I stopped liking him. After all, it's too painful to like someone who doesn't reciprocate, and I'm not a masochist. I regretted it soon after leaving. I should have walked a bit further before hailing a cab. The current stretch of road was hard to get a cab on. After walking and stopping for a while, I decided to flag down a car. After a long wait, a car finally came by. The driver rolled down the window and said bluntly, "Miss, do you know it's illegal to park here?" Feigning weakness, I said, "Hey, please, I've walked so far I can barely stand. I'll pay you 10 times the fare." He looked me up and down for a moment and sighed. "All right, get in." I happily opened the door and got in. As soon as I sat her day down, the person in front said leisurely, "Miss Jessica Nelly, what a coincidence." I was shocked and leaned forward to see his face. He was quite handsome, but I didn't recognize him. I asked in confusion, "Who are you?" He chuckled. "We went to the same school." I continued, "No, I mean, how do you know me?" He laughed. "Who in our year doesn't know Miss Jessica Nelly, the top student in the dance program, with solo performances at every festival, and the school beauty as rated by the Central University students? So, it turns out I was somewhat of a big deal back in school." I listened on. He continued, "But I know you because of your strong personality." This left me even more confused. "There was one time I was playing basketball on the field and accidentally hit you. You marched over with the ball, demanding an apology. I wanted to see what would happen if I didn't apologize, but you threw the ball far away. Was that really me?" "I don't remember anything like that." I awkwardly laughed. He tilted his head slightly, and our eyes met. His eyes were deep, like a vortex that could pull you in. I quickly looked away and asked, "Can I ask your name?" "Vic Temple." "Vic Temple. I think I remember someone like that from school." I quietly recalled my college days. "Miss Jessica Nelly's husband didn't come to pick you up?" He suddenly asked. Cough. I cleared my throat. He's busy. He's busy. It's late at night, and you're left walking on a road where you can't get a cab. It seems like he's abandoned you." I awkwardly smiled and said, "Well, marital conflicts and separations are quite normal, aren't they?" He replied casually. From this angle, it seemed like he had a faint smile on his lips. "Go to Hongshan Mansion. No, 31. I know. How does he know everything?" I was puzzled. Since I was still in his car, I swallowed all my questions. The car didn't go straight there, but stopped at a central shopping plaza. He got out and said, "Miss Jessica Nelly, I need to buy something. Could you wait here for a while?" I didn't want to trouble him and quickly said, "No need. It's easy to get a cab here. I'll pay you, and I'll take a taxi." He smiled faintly, "But I want Miss Jessica Nellie to stay in my car." The atmosphere felt a bit strange. I nodded. "Oh, all right then." Vic Temple smiled, locked the car, and left. If it weren't for the car's high value, I really suspect I'd encountered a robber. I pushed my unease aside and downseat off in the car. Fortunately, he returned not long after, carrying a strawberry cake. I asked, "Is someone celebrating their birthday?" He handed me the cake and said softly, "Happy birthday, Miss Jessica Nellie." So, someone remembered my birthday. I took the cake and felt a bit teary. "How did you know?" He smiled. I said Miss Jessica Nellie was a well-known figure in school. Knowing these things isn't surprising. Maybe it wasn't much back then. But now, almost 3 years after graduation, how would he still remember? I murmured, "You have a good memory," when he dropped me off at Baishi Mansion. I took out my wallet to pay him. He looked at me with a smile. "Does Miss Jessica Nellie think I need this money?" "All right, thanks then." I put the money back. He asked, "Does Miss Jessica Nellie not dance anymore?" I frowned for a moment. He continued, "Someone as talented as Miss Jessica Nellie. I always thought you'd become a famous dancer." I tugged at the corners of my lips and said softly, "I did hope for that, but now, I don't even have a chance to step on the stage." Vic Temple looked at me seriously. "I've always admired Miss Jessica Nellie's dance. If you don't mind, could you perform another dance for me?" To make sure I'd agree, he added, "Consider it a thank you for the ride." Sure, I agreed readily. I really wanted an audience. After setting down the cake, I walked slowly to the streetlight, lifted my skirt, and performed a bow. The warm yellow light covered my skirt, and I lowered my eyes, dancing softly through a familiar routine as I had countless times before. Vic Temple applauded sincerely, saying, "Miss Jessica Nellie, you're stunningly beautiful." I picked up the cake again and bowed to him. "Thank you, I'm quite happy today." He smiled and handed me a business card. "I'm happy too. It just so happens that my company is investing in a dance show. If Miss Jessica Nellie is interested, please contact me." It's hard to deny I was tempted, only I know how much I long to be on stage. I took the business card, thanked him again, and left. The lights at the Austin family villa were still on. I checked my watch. It was only 10:30. I thought he'd be out all night. I pushed the door open and saw Elliot Austin sitting on the sofa with a gloomy expression. There was a cake on the table. I pretended not to see it and was about to leave. "Jessica Nellie," Elliot Austin suddenly called out, "where did you get that cake from?" I was so angry I almost laughed. So, he's fine with buying cakes for his mistress, but doesn't want anyone else to get one for me. Someone gave it to me, too. Why do you care? I snapped back. Elliot Austin rubbed his forehead, suppressing his anger. "Come over and eat the cake." "I don't want to." I turned to go upstairs. He coldly said, "Have you forgotten what I told you before? Is this your attitude towards me?" I patiently walked over and sat her down in front of him. "So, did you buy too many cakes for Polybrook and thought you'd throw one my way?" Elliot Austin sneered. "Otherwise, why would you think you deserve it?" "Yes, I don't deserve it." As if anyone would care about eating it, fearing that he might go and put pressure on my parents again. I hesitated for a moment, but eventually opened the cake he bought and shoved a couple of bites into my mouth. "Thanks for the charity," I said. Elliot Austin's face turned pale. I smiled and added, "Next time, if she doesn't want it, don't bring it back. I'm not a trash collector." In the next moment, as he was about to blow up, I quickly grabbed the cake and ran into my room, locking the door behind me. When did my relationship with Elliot Austin become like this? It used to be harmonious before Polybrook showed up. Back then, I liked him, and while he didn't quite like me, he was always respectful. He didn't stop me from pursuing my dance dreams, and even came to watch my performances. But he seemed to change after a particular performance, and with the decline of the Nellie Group, he began to control my life on his own. The key issue with our deteriorated relationship was his affair with Polybrook. I stared at the glaring white ceiling and sighed quietly. I decided to go to the dance audition Vic Temple mentioned. I looked up the dance production Vic Temple talked about. It was a major production competing with Rebirth called Fallen. I sneaked out of the house. Of course, I couldn't let the family driver take me. There's no one in the Austin family I trust except myself. Vic Temple was waiting for me outside. He seemed quite pleased, his eyes fixed on me without leaving. I awkwardly touched my face and asked, "What's wrong with me?" He smiled lightly and said, "Nothing. I just think Jessica Nellie is very beautiful, and people naturally want to appreciate beauty." It had been a while since anyone complimented my looks. Even though I knew I was attractive, my confidence had been gradually worn away by Elliot Austin's betrayals and Polybrook's provocations. My face flushed, and I softly said, Thank you. Unlike the public audition for Rebirth, Fallen was an internal selection. After my performance, Dick Temple draped a thin blanket over my shoulders. I asked, "How did I do?" He smiled gently. I'd never seen a dancer as perfect as Jessica Nelly. My blood seemed to rush, and my cheeks felt hot. I looked at him curiously and asked, "Does Dick Temple flirt with everyone like this?" He couldn't help but laugh. "I'm just speaking the truth." In the end, I was cast as the lead. I stood up excitedly and asked, "Are you sure? Can we sign the contract?" Dick Temple placed a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "There's no need to rush. It's definitely you. The director, producer, and investors are all very satisfied with you." All right, I had been haunted by the shadow of losing a role just before signing a contract before, so I was relieved when the signing went smoothly. Dick Temple took me back home, and I hummed a happy tune the whole way. He watched me quietly with a smile. I suddenly felt self-conscious and stopped singing, sitting stiffly. The nervousness I hadn't felt in years was unsettling me again. Since the incident on my last birthday, Elliot Austin hadn't been coming back to the villa much. He seemed to think that his cold treatment would get to me, considering how I used to call him carefully whenever he didn't come home, and he always acted impatient, saying, "Don't call unless it's important. It's annoying." I asked him, "What counts as important?" "I was sick. Is that important?" "A bout of chronic appendicitis had me in pain for a day and a night, and I had to be taken to the hospital by ambulance. Call back when you're about to die." There was also Polly Brooks' delicate voice on the side. "Elliot, who is it?" He coldly replied, "It's nothing. Just a persistent scammer." At that moment, he labeled me as a persistent scammer. I couldn't understand what I had done to be called that. The phone kept making the beep sound as he hung up. I glanced at the time, 1:35 a.m. He was probably irritated because I had woken him up with my call, but I didn't care anymore. Since that day, my once passionate love for Elliot Austin had gradually extinguished. Now, it had turned into a pile of cold ashes. It wasn't until the promotional video and posters for Fallen came out that Elliot Austin hurried back to the Austin house. I, as usual, locked my room door. Elliot Austin pounded on the door angrily and even started kicking it. The bang-bang sounds were quite frightening. I quietly slipped a pair of scissors into my sleeve. I didn't intend to actually stab him, but if he tried to hit me again, I wouldn't hold back. After all, he had slapped me before. The door of the Austin house was of such good quality that despite his tantrum outside for nearly half an hour, it didn't budge. When he calmed down, the housekeeper dared to give him the spare key. My hearing was unusually sharp, and I could even hear the click of the lock. He glared at me and said coldly, "Either you find someone to cancel the contract, or I'll do it for you. You choose." I looked at him and said, "Breaking the contract will cost a lot of money, and I don't have any." Elliot Austin sneered. "Can the Austin family afford you? You don't need to worry about money. What if I don't want to?" We were nose to nose. He laughed angrily. "Jessica Nelly, do you really think you're something special? Everything you have, including what you use and everything from the Nelly family, is provided by me. Do you think you have a choice?" I remained silent for a moment and said, Donda, you haven't given me a chance to earn money on my own. Most of my classmates who graduated with me are now dancers or teachers, making thousands per performance. Back in college, I was the best among everyone. But now, I'm a caged canary. All my lifelines are controlled by Elliot Austin, and no matter how hard I struggle, I just face more and more severe oppression. I sighed. Why can't I? You took so many opportunities that should have been mine and gave them to Polly Brooke. Now my role doesn't conflict with hers. So why are you still trying to grab it? Elliot Austin sneered. Do you think dancing on stage is so glamorous? Do you know what the men in the audience are talking about? What they're fantasizing about? I was somewhat upset. Why does everything have to be judged by others' opinions? I don't care, but I do. Elliot Austin frowned. As long as you're Mrs. Austin, don't even think about getting on stage. The argument ended with Elliot Austin slamming the door and leaving. I was locked in the house by him. He probably went to negotiate with the producers, who were unwilling to replace me, so he resorted to trapping me instead. I didn't cry or make a fuss. I kept eating well and practiced dancing in my room every day. Elliot Austin must have sensed something was off. He hadn't been spending time with Polly Brooke, and had instead been staying with me every day. I was carefully picking bones from a piece of fish when he asked, "Have you come to terms with it?" I replied, Donda. Eating well gives me the strength to dance. Dick Temple had contacted me, saying that as long as I didn't personally come to withdraw from the lead role, it would remain mine. Elliot Austin could lock me up as much as he wanted. I had plenty of ways to sneak out, and if I got out, I definitely wouldn't come back. My dad had told me that Nelly Group had received a large influx of funds, enough to bring the company back to life. Unlike the small resources Elliot Austin trickled out, this benefactor was genuinely generous. My dad even said over the phone, if you want to divorce Elliot Austin, go ahead. He doesn't want the Nelly group to succeed. With that concern gone, what was there to be afraid of? The more I acted normal, the more anxious Elliot Austin seemed. He started bringing Polly Brooke to the Austin house frequently and eventually had her move in here. That was better. It saved me the trouble of gathering evidence. Whenever I saw Polly Brooke, she always looked weak and pitiful. Jessica, are you going to divorce Elliot? Sometimes, when Elliot Austin was around, I would deliberately ask, you've been together for almost a year, right? I think I discovered it in our second year of marriage. Elliot Austin looked at me with a complicated expression. You remember that clearly. I retorted, well, your relationship seems pretty stable, more so than mine as the official wife. Bringing your mistress home. Elliot Austin, you're quite something. He probably thought I was angry and actually laughed. With everything ready, I finally decided to make my escape. I left behind everything Elliot Austin bought for me and only took a few of my favorite dance outfits. Just as I was happily planning my big escape, Elliot Austin walked into my room. I hurriedly hid my packed luggage under the bed and hummed a song to act nonchalant. He came over and sat her down. You seem to be in a good mood lately. How could I not be? I was about to leave, and with evidence of his infidelity, he'd probably be out of my life for good. I smiled. Polly Brooke is waiting for you in the room. What are you doing here? Jealous, he asked. Jealous of what? He cupped my face with both hands. It would have been better if you had said you were jealous, that you were angry, instead of pretending not to care. Elliot Austin was acting unusually today. Seeing that I had no intention of leaving, I pointed to the door and said, if you're not leaving, then I am. Although I acted decisively, I was anxious inside. If he didn't leave, my escape plan would fall apart. Elliot Austin stared at me for a while, with emotions in his eyes that I couldn't understand. He didn't let go, but instead pulled me into his embrace. I frowned. Struggling to get up, he held me so tightly that I couldn't move. Elliot Austin rested his chin on my shoulder and said, don't go dancing anymore. The Austin family can provide everything for you. He was really acting out of character today. I stiffened and said, no, I want to stand on the stage and become an excellent dancer. That's something you can't give me. Ha. Elliot Austin finally let go of me, his eyes scanning me coldly from top to bottom. I felt a chill all over from his gaze. He squinted and said coldly, do you really enjoy being the center of attention on stage? I paused for a moment and slowly nodded. He suddenly smiled, just like all those years ago, when you did the opening dance to grab everyone's attention. I didn't understand why he suddenly brought that up. Elliot Austin didn't say anything else. He just stared at me for a while before dropping a cryptic, think about it some more, and walked away. What a weirdo. I frowned and silently cursed him in my mind. I breathed a sigh of relief and went back to unpacking the luggage I had kicked inside earlier. With the moon dark and the wind high, it was a good time to escape. After living at the Austin house for 4 years, I knew the place as well as Elliot Austin did. I successfully got into Vic Temple's car and patted my chest, feeling relieved. Miss Jessica Nelly, it seems like you're eloping with me now. I suspected he was intentionally making these ambiguous remarks. I responded deliberately, isn't that the case? Vic Temple chuckled. So, can I call you lady now? I looked at him in shock. Vic Temple smiled and said, lady. I felt like I had been struck by lightning. I awkwardly shivered and prepared to laugh it off. You really know how to joke. Ha ha. Vic Temple glanced at me and smiled without saying anything. I didn't have time to worry about what Elliot Austin might do when he discovered I was gone. After joining the rehearsal group, I stayed there. The security was excellent, and it wasn't his territory, so he couldn't get in. Finally, the day of the performance arrived. As the audience began to fill the seats, I hid backstage, watching them come in after getting my makeup and hair done. The stage lights were dazzling, and the crowd in the audience was a sea of faces. After 4 years, I was finally able to stand on stage again. No longer was I the only one dancing alone in the dressing room. The performance was divided into 4 parts: hope, disappointment, despair, and fall. I changed costumes 4 times and coordinated perfectly with my co-actors. Throughout the 2-hour performance, I didn't feel the slightest bit tired. When we took our bows, the applause from the audience was deafening. Tears welled up in my eyes. I was meant to stand on a dazzling stage, winning praise and applause through dance. Backstage, everyone was discussing the success of the performance. Vic Temple greeted me with a bouquet of flowers. He said, people who belong on the stage should shine brightly on it. Holding the flowers, I cried like a child. There was a noisy commotion outside the door. I could roughly tell it was Elliot Austin. Vic Temple asked, should I drive him away? I shook my head. He should have received the court summons by now. After running out of the Austin house, I focused on practicing dance at the studio every day. After filing for divorce, I didn't bother with him or Polly Brooke anymore. But soon, Polly Brooke found my contact information and called me. I thought she was going to gloat, but instead, she was crying on the phone, urging me to go back to Elliot Austin. I was completely stunned and sarcastically said, "What, has Elliot Austin taken up with a new mistress?" Polly Brooke sobbed. "Elliot Austin? No, Elliot Austin told me to contact you and explain." "Don't ignore him," I frowned. "Explain what?" she cried. "We're separated now. Don't worry, I won't bother you again. I won't say anything more." I was speechless. I wasn't interested in hearing anything more and ended the call. I didn't expect Polly Brooke to contact me, and now Elliot Austin was here as well. When I came out, Elliot Austin finally stopped making a scene. He glared at me coldly. "Jessica, come back with me." I waved to Vic Temple, signaling that I wanted to talk to Elliot Austin alone for a moment. Soon, the backstage was left with just the two of us. "I filed for divorce and have evidence of your affair with your mistress. I think you'd better find a lawyer quickly, instead of wasting time with me." Elliot Austin scoffed. "There's nothing between Polly and me. What use are your so-called proofs?" "So, there really are people with such thick skin. 2 years of affair with Polly Brooke, and he still has the nerve to say there was nothing between them." I smiled. "Whether it's useful or not isn't up to you to decide. And it's certainly not up to me. The Nelly Group doesn't rely on you anymore. You've lost your only leverage against me, so why should I listen to you?" Elliot Austin clenched his fists, as if he finally realized I was no longer under his control, and his tone softened unexpectedly. "Are you still upset about me bringing Polly Brooke home? There was nothing between her and me. I know you hated her back in college. I only sought her out to make you mad." He continued, "If you had shown me more love, I wouldn't have done this." "So, he's saying he did all this just to test whether I loved him." I found it quite amusing. I asked, "Are you sure there was no physical relationship with her? I called you at around 1 a.m. before. You had someone sweetly calling you Elliot. Are you saying there was nothing? Who are you fooling?" Elliot Austin responded with long silence. After a while, he suddenly said, "And you, haven't you ever deceived me? Who was it that deliberately fell on stage to seduce me? You did everything to marry into the Austin family, didn't you? Just for the money." So, he thought my fall on stage was deliberate. What started as genuine affection in my heart was just a show to him. No wonder he previously described me as a persistent liar. I laughed self-deprecatingly and asked, "Who told you that?" Before he could answer, I continued, "It must have been Polly Brooke, right? She was always trying to jab at me in college. I was wondering why you two suddenly got together." Elliot Austin retorted, "So what if it was her? Do you dare say you weren't being deliberate? You were obviously the top in your dance major. How could you make such a rookie mistake on stage?" Why did I fall? Of course, it was because of that sudden flutter in my heart. I tugged at my lip and said, "Don. Why wouldn't I? I fell because I was nervous after locking eyes with someone I liked." Elliot Austin's eyelashes fluttered, his face a mix of shock and joy. "Elliot Austin, you're always so self-righteous." I took a step back. "You believe whatever people tell you. I really doubt how you manage a company with such intelligence." Elliot Austin's lips moved, and he struggled to push out a few words. "I don't know." I was exasperated and laughed. "You don't know, didn't you ask? If you want to know something, just ask directly." "Elliot Austin, don't you have a mouth? Don't you know the mouth is for clarifying misunderstandings? If not, you can donate it to someone who needs it." He preferred to believe Polly Brooke, whom he barely knew, over spending even a minute asking me. That's Elliot Austin, overbearing, arrogant, and unreasonable. He should be congratulated for finally exhausting all my feelings for him. I didn't say anything more and turned to leave. The video of the performance fall quickly went viral online, and various offers started coming my way. When the hype around the dance drama reached a peak, I released evidence and recordings of Elliot Austin's affair through a few marketing accounts. The divorce proceedings went smoothly. Besides the joint marital property from the 4 years of marriage, Elliot Austin, as the guilty party, had to pay me a considerable amount in compensation. When Polly Brooke's starring role in The Progeny premiered, comparisons between her and me started flooding in. "Wow, what's this supposed to be?" They claim it's a big production, but the dance performers are so bad that I think I could have done better. Isn't it obvious? The lead actress is the mistress who climbed the ranks thanks to Jessica's ex-husband. This role was never meant for her. She even stole many roles from Jessica, apparently with the help of Jessica's ex-husband. Such shamelessness. And look at her appearance. It's clear she and Elliot are a match made in heaven. The drama involving me, Elliot Austin, and Polly Brooke continue to heat up online. Things taken from others must eventually be returned. Holly Brooke didn't practice her basics well, focusing all her efforts on seducing Elliot Austin. How could such a person deliver a good performance? Elliot Austin tried to control the news cycle, but I kept the momentum going with a large sum of money, buying trending spots. Eventually, the situation escalated beyond Elliot Austin's control. He quickly issued a clarification, saying this was a private matter between us and shouldn't occupy public resources, and that the online rumors were inaccurate. In summary, he implied there was more to the story. I responded generously, shocking. A company president under 30 loses his ability to speak and takes a mistress, enraging his ex-wife. I also released the recording of the confrontation with Elliot Austin. After all the commotion, the hype surged again. Elliot Austin's company's stock price plummeted, and investors began withdrawing their funds. A company can't be run by just one person. Soon, other shareholders united in protest and pushed to remove him from the CEO position. After divorcing Elliot Austin, I saw him once more at a party. He was propping up his chin with one hand, staring distractedly at the wine in his glass. I sat her down in front of him and said, Don, I heard the company is about to change hands. I see you've been trying to rally partners here, but now everyone avoids you, fearing you'll damage their company's reputation. Elliot Austin looked up at me, his gaze lingering below my neck. He paused, took off his coat, and draped it over me. Why are you wearing so little? His tone was still as commanding as ever. I felt like laughing, and promptly threw his coat on the floor. I dressed myself, do what I wanted to do. You don't need to meddle. Oh, I forgot. You're struggling just to manage yourself now. Elliot Austin's face turned slightly ugly. He has always been an extremely proud person. How could he tolerate such blows? He fell silent for a moment and reached out to touch my face. I recoiled in disgust, leaving him frowning in place. I love you, he said softly. I was wrong before. If you like dancing, you can continue, and I'll support you in the future. He tightened his grip on the water glass and tentatively asked, You still love me, right? I was about to say he was dreaming, when suddenly a large hand rested on my shoulder. Vic Temple pulled me a step closer to him and said, Where did the lady go? It took me a while to find her. Elliot Austin looked at me in disbelief and repeated, Lady. I stiffly turned to look at Vic Temple. He was looking back at me, his deep eyes seeming to draw you in. After a moment, Vic Temple looked away, swirled his wine, and took a sip, raising his glass to Elliot Austin and finishing it in one gulp. He said lazily, Thanks, Elliot Austin, for letting Jessica go. Otherwise, I might have been secretly in love for another 10 years without any results. Secretly in love. Even though we had known each other for long. He really said it out loud, and even so smoothly. Well, it's pretty good if it makes Elliot Austin mad. I suddenly inched closer to him. Vic Temple chuckled softly, pinched my cheek, and said affectionately, My dad happened to be here too. He wants to meet you. Let's go. Saying that, he took my hand and, ignoring Elliot Austin's gaze, pulled me away. I thought he was joking about meeting his father, until we were actually introduced to him. I awkwardly smiled and said, Uncle, hi. Terence Terry looked at me kindly and said, Jessica Nelly, Vic Temple has told me about you. I've also met your parents. When do you plan to get your marriage license? I was stunned. Vic Temple raised his eyebrows at me and took another sip of his wine. After some awkward small talk, I learned that the funds that saved the Nelly family originally came from Vic Temple and his father because of some business dealings. He had even met my parents a long time ago. Once Terence Terry left, I pinched Vic Temple's arm. What are you doing? Vic Temple bent down and stared at me for a while, saying slowly and clearly, What? Can't you tell? I'm proposing, I said. How long have we known each other? Are you kidding? Vic Temple replied lazily, But I've known you for 6 years. Wait, I looked at him suspiciously. What you just said about secretly loving me, that can't be true, right? He smiled and pulled me into his arms. Miss Jessica Nelly, for every stage you're on, there's always someone like me standing behind you. Only back then, I couldn't get on stage to support you, and had to watch you fall for someone else. After a moment, he sighed with relief and said, Fortunately, I waited. Later, Elliot Austin tried to contact me many times, but I ignored him. Not long after, I saw news that the Austin Group had a new CEO and even changed its name. Once, while going to a rehearsal, I saw Polly Brooke squatting by the roadside eating a lunchbox. Even though she wasn't unattractive, no production team dared to hire her now. With Elliot Austin's downfall and no longer having his protection, she was left with only basic work and minor tasks. The director who had previously signed Polly Brooke sent me a script through an intermediary. I glanced at the director's name and discarded it. Please pass a message to your director. Just tell him that my emotions are right. and I can't play the leading lady in his mind. Vic Temple, who was watching me, burst out laughing. I asked, "What are you laughing at?" Vic Temple slowly sat her down in front of me, resting his chin on his hand, and said, "I think the lady has quite my style." Later, after I kept pressing him, Vic Temple finally admitted that he happened to be the one who drove me home that day, and had actually driven that route countless times. Every time he deliberately drove past me, seeing me unmoved, he would curse himself and circle back. "If I hadn't stopped your car, what would you have done?" "What else could I do? Just keep creating chances for us to run into each other." I pushed him away a bit. "Are you a creepy stalker?" Vic Temple shamelessly leaned closer. "I'm just someone who has been secretly in love with Miss Jessica Nelly for many years." "Alright, I've really become a lady now." The story ends here. Feel free to subscribe to the channel to get the latest content. A lot of novels are updated daily.